The Memory of Love, Chapter 32. In Elias Cole's room, a bustle of activity. Adrian waits in the corridor. In time, a doctor emerges, followed by a nurse, wheeling a trolley of equipment. How is he? Adrian asks of the doctor. The man, a Swede, possessed of the crisp antiseptic aloofness Adrian associates with Northern Europeans, looks at Adrian, according him the automatic respect of a fellow white man. Not so great, but okay. Can I talk to him? Are you a doctor? I'm a counselor, he says. Oh, I see. Well then, you may as well know he's been treated with corticosteroids. Now it looks as if he's stopped responding. That's not so unusual. Steroids don't work for everybody. And even when they do, they don't work forever. The trouble is there aren't many other options from here on in. A lung transplant is out of the question. He bends a little closer to Adrian and lowers his voice. I mean, how long have you been here? Since January, says Adrian. The older man shakes his head. He needs oxygen therapy, says the Swede, telling Adrian what he already knows. He is at risk from hypoxemia. Oxygen will improve his quality of life and give him some months more to live. Only maybe. I'm going now to talk to the administrator about it. Good luck, thinks Adrian. He has spoken to Mrs. Mara about an oxygen concentrator for Elias Cole 3 times. On each occasion, she promised to see what she could do. So far, she has done nothing. The demands upon her are many. The last few months of Elias Cole's life are lost in the crowd. Let me know how you get on, says Adrian. He watches the Swede walk away, his rubber clogs creaking on the concrete floor. Inside the room, Elias Cole is sitting up in bed. Over the last few weeks, he has grown noticeably thinner, his face worn almost to the bone. Around his neck, the skin rests in pleats. Standing at one end of the bed, Adrian feels like the priest in an old black and white movie. The man of God hovering at the deathbed, waiting for his moment. To divest himself of this sensation, he goes over to the window and looks over. A kingfisher sits on the telegraph wire. A moment later, it is joined by another. Adrian watches them for a few moments, almost forgetting his purpose in being there. He turned to the old man. How are you feeling? Elias Cole smiles, a tugging of the corner of the lips. That was the last call. I'm in the departure lounge now. Adrian laughs. There's still some time left. I've been warned I may begin to forget. That's one of the possible effects of hypoxemia. There's no guarantee it will happen. There's more I want to tell you. A year passed for me, a year of waiting. There was the 40-day ceremony. Do you know the 40 days mark the end of a wife's period of mourning? Among her own people, Safia would be considered ready for remarriage. Life here is too short to mourn for very long. In November, another Apollo mission landed on the moon. Nobody thought of throwing a party. The crew was supposed to send back color TV images, but something went amiss and the feed failed. Safia followed the news carefully on the radio, just as she had when the first astronauts came out of quarantine and gave a press conference. I knew she thought constantly of Julius, but as I said, it was a year of waiting. Then it was 1970. The 1960s were over. I watched Safia struggle for survival. Following Julius's death, there were practical matters that needed to be considered. The independence which had so struck me at our first meeting had proved to be an illusion. Of course, an illusion sustained and perpetuated by Julius, who had spoiled his wife, and also, I suppose, by the three of us, Kekura, Yansane, and I, in our own way. For hadn't we revered her, did we not outdo ourselves to perform for her amusement? See ourselves as her guardians? We had taken Julius's duties as our own. But now Julius was gone. Kekura fled, and Diana broken. I alone was left. Safia continued to live in the pink house on the hill with the crone aunt, who came and went between the city and the village. The aunt was a woman, as I think I have indicated, from whom a low-level hostility emanated at all times, who seemed possessed of an infinite capacity for hate. She hated the city people, who were full of themselves. She hated non-believers, but Christians more, because she also distracted them. She hated the poor, the weak, the sick, and the needy. In particular, she reviled all members of her own sex. Her attitude to men was somewhat more complicated, for it encompassed both her natural loathing of her fellow man and her sycophancy towards those in possession of some degree of power. That she had disliked me and regarded my visits to the house with suspicion, I knew. Between Safia and the aunt, there had always been a certain amount of bickering. Her aunt was straight from the rice fields. It was unsurprising, therefore, that Safia might be easily irritated by an elder full of village superstitions. Balance in matters of social hierarchy, however, is infinitely delicate, accounted for by so many things: family, age, wealth. The shift in the aunt's manner towards Safia following Julius's death amounted to relatively little. She was merely, one might say, altogether less careful. Her tone of voice became sharper, her demands more frequent and petty. She seemed to feel Safia was there to do her bidding. What had wrought it was this: whilst the aunt was the elder, and as such merited a high degree of deference, it was Safia who had been married to a big man. This, in the aunt's view, of course, who lived in a grandeur house that I am certain the aunt had ever previously set foot in. Now, Julius was gone, and Safia no longer married to a big man. The woman opposite, a coarse-mouthed fish seller, seemed to have found a new vocation in watching the comings and goings at the pink house, a fact she made no effort to conceal. There were occasions I had waited under her gaze, listened to her remark upon my visit to unseen listeners. I never once saw her husband. Doubtless he was barred from the veranda for fear he might be drawn to the newly available temptation in the house opposite. Not that the fish mummy's concerns were baseless. A woman alone does indeed attract the attention of men who scent her vulnerability. It bothered me to think of who might try to take advantage of Safia's situation. Once I found the dancer fellow up there, ostensibly offering condolences. I sat down opposite and glared at him until he left. However, it became interesting to observe the shift in the aunt's manner towards me now that she was in the business of encouraging a protector for her niece. As I have indicated, she was the type of woman who adjusted swiftly to any change in the status quo. One evening, I encountered her as she returned from the mosque. I raised my hat and greeted her in my most respectful tone. "Good evening, Auntie." It stopped her in her tracks, and once she had assured herself I wasn't mocking her in any way, I saw a small smirk of pleasure at being thus addressed. It amused me to think of her as my new-found ally. It was the aunt who brought it to my attention that the two of them were struggling to pay the rent. Julius had been far too young to leave a pension. Through my effort and by applying some leverage upon the dean who sat upon the relevant committee, I managed to secure for Safia a small grant to cover her work cataloging the flora that grew in the university grounds. Not so much she could rely upon it indefinitely. The amount of the grant would give her enough to live for exactly a year. Throughout those months, I worked towards a single goal. I threw my energy into research for a paper on the creation of the Native Affairs Department. If I had once been a merely conscientious academic, I was driven now. It is astonishing the effect of hope. I was working towards a future now, one that included Safia. In the morning, I dealt with my correspondence and planned my lectures that lasted until midday. I took lunch in the cafeteria. In the afternoon, I went to the library and worked my way through the bound minutes of the Aborigines and Native Affairs Department, penciling notes in my notebook as I went. Thoughts of Safia came between me and the letters of the government agent, Thomas George Lawson, his fearsome Protestantism and loyalty to the crown. At about 4 o'clock, I concluded my travels with Lawson on his trips into the interior to settle scores between the chiefs, gathered my papers, and deposited them in my office. The state of nervous anticipation in which I spent my days peaked at about 4:30 when I went to see Safia. Most days I had a reason for, as I think I have told you, I sought to make myself useful to her in as many ways as possible. I dealt with the university bureaucracy, gave her financial advice, and moreover attended to many other minor household matters as well. In the months after Julius's death, I watched as the weight fell away from Safia's body, saw how the lines on either side of her mouth refused to fade, observed from the wandering of her eye her inability to concentrate. From the slight irrelevant smile with which she thanked me, I knew how much pain she suffered. I also knew she would survive, for in the end, people always do. Stay, wait, patience. An evening we walked in the garden. The idea had been mine. Safia looked like she was about to decline, but then changed her mind and led the way down the stairs. It was still light. The dense rain clouds had lifted. There was even a little blue in the sky. The garden was looking somewhat neglected. The harmattan lilies were bent and broken. Like soldiers after a battle, many were strewn in tangles upon the ground. Their once lovely heads had shriveled away. The petals darkened and torn. I remember the occasion because it was perhaps the only time she spoke to me of Julius directly, though she often mentioned him in passing. I still miss him, Elias, she said. I know, I replied. I miss him too. In a way, it was true. Julius had left a space in my life. I had not known a great many friendships. Safia sighed. Perhaps if we'd had a child. But Julius wanted me to finish my studies. There's still time, I said. You are young. It is the stock response. People say such things to widows all the time. I had spoken without thinking. But she merely replied, yes. One word, yet so much more. She had said, yes. Agreed, her life was not over. I looked at her. I was consumed by a feeling of inexpressible joy. Only later did I recognize it for what it was, hope. For in that instant, the beauty and pain of the past, the unbearable present, and the possible future all reigned together. In most other respects, life had returned to a kind of normality. I saw Yansani once on the campus, I think. He seemed to be keeping his head down. No word from Kekura, nor did I hear from Johnson again. The dean seemed in reasonable spirits. A lot of universities in our country and elsewhere were closing their humanities departments or else having their grants cut. Liberal arts were the first to be hit in times of economic stress. The government argued certain skills were more in demand than others. Philosophy, literature, drama, such subjects were a luxury, a frivolity, even in times of need. So far, the dean had proved himself a powerful negotiator in these matters and had somehow managed to save our department the same fate. As the months wore on, Julius, his death, my own arrest, this event seems to recede into the past. One a pleasant occurrence, a visit from Vanessa. It was Saturday when she turned up at the apartment. I could scarcely remember when I had last seen her. At any rate, she hadn't changed, though her look had been updated. I heard later she had a new boyfriend. She wore a large afro wig and a pair of tight trousers. I've never cared for the looks of trousers on a woman. It was hard not to make comparisons with Safia, and I wonder if Vanessa didn't sense my appraisal, for she leaned against the kitchen counter and eyed me challengingly. You look well, Vanessa, I said. Thank you, Elias. I came by to see how you are. As you see, I'm well. Well, I'm pleased about that. She sounded as though she had heard different. I noticed her glance around the apartment. Then she said, maybe you would like to make me a coffee? I had no intention of offering her a coffee. Nevertheless, I reached around her and found the Nescafe and evaporated milk. I lit the gas ring and boiled water. I didn't offer her any sugar. Is it true you were arrested? She asked. No, it isn't, I lied. That's what they say. Well, they are mistaken. I didn't ask how she knew. It would have been exactly like Vanessa to have contacts among the police, a lover or two. She watched me coolly. The cup of coffee sat on the counter. Your coffee will get cold. It's too bitter, she said, not taking her eyes off me. So maybe it's not such a bad thing for you. What happened to Julius? I don't know what you mean, I said. Julius was my friend. His death is a tragedy. She laughed, a short, soft, and yet abrupt sound. So his wife is a widow now. Her voice had taken an insinuating sneer, which I didn't like. Yes, I said. Safia is mourning the loss of her husband. That laugh again. Vanessa, I said, I'm happy to see you. Come and visit again, or I'll come to you. Right now, I'm due out. For a few moments, she said nothing, but continued to regard me. And when she spoke, she enunciated each word, letting them slide suggestively out of her mouth, one by one. Poison drops. Elias called, look at your face. I refused to let Vanessa's malicious little call unsettle me. Still, it must have done so because later that day, I thought I saw Julius. It was a momentary thing, just a fellow who stepped out of a doorway, something in his profile. He walked on ahead of me, and of course, it wasn't Julius at all. I could tell by the walk. And of course, Julius was there. Still, the shock left me suddenly incapacitated. My knees buckled. It took me some minutes before I could recover and continue on my way. The day I proposed to Safia, I arrived at the house just as she was dealing with a young hustler who was trying to pretend Julius had owed him money. A lie, of course. Julius had been gone nearly a year, but that didn't stop people trying. I saw how tired she was beginning to look, how weary of it all. The grant money was just about to come to an end. I made my offer, a practical rather than a romantic proposal, a compromise between my position and hers. I alluded to Julius all the time. I spoke. I was aware of the aunt listening from the recesses of the house. Safia asked for time to consider my offer. A month later, I reiterated, and this time Safia accepted. As I left the house, I saw the aunt on her way back from the mosque. I told her the news, for I wanted to acquire the official seal of approval as soon as possible. The old woman's face split into an obsequious grin, such that I had the impression perhaps she had cared less for Julius than I had imagined. The dean, too, offered me his congratulations. He seemed genuinely pleased at the outcome. A few weeks later, I was promised to senior lecturer, and soon after that, a house on the campus became available at short notice. The previous occupant had lost his job in the latest round of cuts. It was unfortunate, but these were the facts of life. I kept news of the house from Safia until I had arranged to have it painted and the roof repaired where the rains had damaged the zinc. Apropos of all that, Yansane too was one of the unlucky ones. I went to his leaving party, a sober affair attended by a sprinkling of his colleagues. In his address, the dean thanked Yanase for his commitment to the department. Yansane rose and said a few words. At one point, he seemed overcome by emotion and fell silent, but then regained his voice and thanked several of his colleagues. Only later did it strike me he had made no reference to the dean, whom convention might have required him to acknowledge. Afterwards, people came up and patted him on the shoulder. I shook his hand and offered him my commiserations, but he merely muttered his thanks and kept his eyes fixed on his shoes. I was sorry for Yansane, naturally, but nothing could dent my happiness.